explicit guidance to DHS staff on how to carry out 2 executive orders signed by the President on January 25th, one dealing with interior enforcement and one dealing with border security. Perhaps most critically, the President is empowering DHS to carry out the immigration laws currently on the books. Of course, DHS gave a full briefing on these memos this morning, but just to briefly summarize a few of the facts. The memo regarding the executive order enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States outlines several practices and policies in order to strengthen the efficient and faithful execution of this country's immigration laws. That includes hiring more ICE agents and officers, as well as additional mission support and legal staff necessary to support their activities. This memo also directs the establishment of the Victims of Immigration Crime ICE, fulfilling another major campaign promise of the President. This office will facilitate the engagement with victims and their families to ensure that their questions and immigration enforcement efforts are addressed. The memo regarding the executive order border security and immigration enforcement improvements outlines the steps that DHS will take to secure the nation's southern border, prevent further illegal immigration, and to repatriate illegal immigrants swiftly, consistently, and humanely. This includes immediately identifying and allocating all sources of available funding for the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of a wall along our southern border, and hiring of additional personnel, including 5,000 additional CBP border agents. Again, I would refer you to DHS for further comment on these specific memos. There are fact sheets and Q&As on the DHS website that address many of the intricacies and areas within each of these executive orders that you might have questions on. Also this weekend, the President had calls with the President of Panama and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Readouts of those calls have both been provided. The President's team this weekend also had a very productive meeting on the President's plan to repeal and replace Obamacare and ensure that it is replaced with a system that works for all Americans. Back to the President's schedule today, in honor of Black History Month, the President started his day by visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture. The museum opened last September and has quickly become one of Washington's most visited attractions. The President was joined by a group of individuals that included his daughter Ivanka, Dr. Ben Carson and his wife, Senator Tim Scott, Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Museum Director Lonnie Bunch, Dr. David Skorkin, who was the Secretary of the Smithsonian, and as well as others. The President commented several times during his tour about how impressed he was with the museum. Some of the exhibits that he was particularly drawn to included the section on Harriet Tubman, which featured a shawl that was given to her by Queen Victoria in the late 1800s, the section of the museum that featured the courageous contribution of African Americans that have made to the United States military, and the President was particularly pleased by the Muhammad Ali exhibit with the quote, "I shook up the world," prominently displayed. The President also enjoyed viewing for the first time with Dr. and Mrs. Carson the exhibit dedicated to his extraordinary life. Similarly, Alveda King, who had never viewed the museum's exhibit on her uncle, the President was honored that he was able to share this experience with the two of them specifically. The President further expressed his appreciation for the tour and said he looks forward to returning again. His desire is to honor the immense contributions of courageous African American leaders throughout our history by building a more unified country dedicated to liberty and justice. This afternoon, the President will have a routine classified National Security Council briefing in the Situation Room, in addition to his presidential daily briefing, which he received earlier this morning. Then, this evening, the President will have dinner with the Vice President. I'm sure that they will discuss the Vice President's recent trip to Europe. The Vice President was an incredible representative for our nation and the President during his time, where he reiterated our support for European allies in unified pursuit of the noble ideas of freedom, democracy, and justice, and the rule of law, and discussing how to do more to encourage all NATO allies to meet their financial obligations and commitments. During his speech before the Munich Security Conference on Saturday, the Vice President conveyed the administration's unwavering commitment to Europe's peace and prosperity, especially remembering the tens of thousands of Americans who gave their lives to defend those ideals during both World War I and II. These shared sacrifices are the backbone of our alliance and our mission of security through strength. During his time in Munich, the Vice President also met with 9 world leaders. The Vice President and these leaders discussed the issues most pressing to them, including the escalating violence in eastern Ukraine and the role of NATO in the fight against ISIS. The Vice President also met in Brussels with the President of the Vice President Tusk of the Council of European Union and the NATO Secretary General. As a candidate for office, President Trump actually called attention repeatedly to the fact that for too long, many of our other NATO allies have not been sharing the financial burden. The President looks forward to working closely with NATO to advance our shared objectives. A strong NATO means a safer world, and the United States looks forward to working with our partners in NATO to achieve just that. Looking ahead to the President's upcoming schedule, tomorrow he'll meet with Secretary of State Tillerson, fresh off his trip to Germany for the G20 Foreign Minister Summit. They'll discuss the President's foreign policy agenda and the Secretary's upcoming trip to Mexico. Thursday morning, he'll have a listening session regarding job creation in the manufacturing sector with CEOs and business leaders from different industries. On Friday, he'll deliver remarks to the Conservative Political Action Conference, and we are just 1 week out today from the President's joint address to Congress. The President will continue to work closely with his team to craft a speech that lays out his ambitious policy agenda that will benefit all Americans. Plans are currently in the works for pre- and post-address activities for the President and his staff, and we'll have more updates as the week goes on. Before I take your questions, I want to address the recent threats and acts of vandalism on Jewish community centers throughout the country. The President said this morning, I just want to reiterate, quote, "The anti-Semitic threats targeting our Jewish community centers are horrible and painful, and a very sad reminder of the work that we must do, the work that must be done to root out hate and prejudice and evil." With that, take some of your questions. Jim Stenson.
Sean?
Yeah.
Sean, thank you. I was curious if the President regrets or wants to clarify his characterization, by the way, I have two questions, of the media as an enemy of the American people.
I think the President has been very clear that certain outlets have gone out of their way to not represent his record accurately, and it is a concern to him. And I think some reporters, he has deep respect for the First Amendment, for the role of the press. I've addressed this multiple times in the past. He has a healthy respect for the press, but I think that it's a two-way street, as I've also said before, and I think that the President understands that certain outlets have gone out of their way to not be completely accurate and fair in their coverage of what's going on.
Speaking of the media, I've noticed 2 times in the last week that you've been directly contradicted by 2 members of the media, one of them Bill Maher of HBO, who said that in front of guests at Mar-a-Lago, the President was briefed on the classified North Korean situation.
Say that again? I'm sorry.
The President and the Prime Minister of Japan were briefed in front of guests.
No, I didn't say that.
No. This is what was being said on HBO, that the President and the Prime Minister were briefed on classified information in front of guests at Mar-a-Lago. I just want to clarify, did that happen?
No.
Or did they go to this
No, I think I walked through this timeline before, Jim, and it's amazing. A photo gets put out, the President's got a piece of paper, and the immediate conclusion is he's got to be talking about classified information. The President was briefed on the situation in North Korea prior to the dinner in a skiff that's at Mar-a-Lago. He went and had dinner. He discussed the logistics of the press conference, which I've talked to you all about before. There was a question as to where to hold the press conference. They had a discussion about the logistics of it. And subsequent to that dinner, he was briefed again in a skiff with updates on the situation in North Korea. That's it, plain and simple. But to your first question, I think that it's amazing that the immediate jump of conclusion to several outlets was, well, there's a piece of paper, it must be classified. I don't, it's amazing to see that, and to see people jump to that conclusion, that he's surrounded by his staff and members of the Japanese delegation. The conclusion is they must be doing something nefarious or wrong. In fact, he followed every procedure that's laid out. And I think in some cases it's disheartening to realize that those are the kind of immediate conclusions that somebody jumps to. When you talk about coverage, we have a free press. We have the right for people to say and do what they believe. But at some point, it is incumbent upon people to try to get it right. And in that case, it wasn't even an attempted. It was a jump to conclusion by many to say that there must be something else going on, when in fact we were able to provide a very, very clear tick-tock as to far as what had happened. And that, Jessica.
Sean, question about the resignation of the 10 people off the Asian American Council.
Right.
That happened last week, and in the letter they said in part, we can no longer serve a president whose policies aim to create outcomes that are diametrically opposite to our principles, goals, and charge. First of all, what's the White House's reaction, and do you
Yeah, those members of that council were political appointees of the Obama administration. Their terms were set to expire this year. So it's not surprising in the sense that they were appointees of Barack Obama. They were going to have their terms expire. But I get it. But most political appointees from other agencies or whatever would automatically resign because of the term of these individuals. They would carry through to later in the year. But I don't think it's surprising that people who were appointed by Barack Obama to fulfill his agenda suddenly understand that there is a new administration in town and didn't want to stay on board. But we will make sure that we appoint people to this task force. It's important. It's something that's provided guidance to multiple presidents in the past, and we will continue to do that. Shannon.
On the statement today about the anti-Semitic acts,
Yeah.
What specifically is the president going to do to address that issue? And along those lines, there were reports earlier on that he was considering changing the mandate of this countering violent extremism program to focus just on Islamic extremist groups. Is he still considering that, or would he also leave the scope of the program to also consider?
Are you talking about the travel executive order?
No. This is the countering violent extremism program.
Right.
That.
Yeah, and again, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves there. There's nothing to announce on that front. And secondly, to the first part of your question, I think the president's going to do what he's talked about since election night. It's through deed and action. Talk about how we can unify this country and speak out against, hate, anti-Semitism, racism, and he's going to continue to do that. And I think that he will show you over the course of months and years through what he does in terms of his policies and his speech that he is going to be a president that brings people together, that unites them, and that speaks very, very forcefully against those who are seeking to do hate or to tear people down because of their religion or their gender or the color of their skin. I mean, those are all things that I think the president's clear on. John?
Two questions unrelated, if I could. The next big piece in the immigration profile here at the White House is going to be the new executive order. Is the president confident that this one will pass legal muster? And if he is, what gives him that confidence?
Well, I think I want to be clear that we feel confident that we're still going to prevail on the case, the merits of the case. I think that, as was seen in the case of Massachusetts, once it is fully adjudicated, we will prevail because the authority is granted to the president to do what he has to protect the country. So I feel very, very confident about where we're going to. The second track that he's made very clear as well is that until that occurs, we're going to have a dual track system, and that we're going to make sure that we implement a second executive order that is tailored to achieve the same goals, but in accordance with what the court said. So we've been working very closely with the Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and the team here at the White House to make sure that the next step achieves the president's goal of protecting the country and does so in a way that recognizes the concerns of the court had until we prevail at a later time. So it's a dual track thing.
Second question. Will this administration send American terror suspects picked up overseas to Guantanamo Bay for interrogation and prosecution?
I'm not going to discuss that right now. As the president has said very clearly before, we don't telegraph what we're going to do. I think he has made very clear, though, that he believes that Guantanamo Bay does serve a very, very healthy purpose in our national security and making sure that we don't bring terrorists to our seas. But I'm not going to get into what we may or may not do in the future. Again, I'm just not going to.
John, I want to give you a chance to respond to something because I think that the president's remarks and your clarification about where he stands on anti-Semitism is clear. But after that statement was made by the president, the Anne Frank Center released a pretty strongly worded one, saying that these remarks, while well received, are a band-aid on the cancer within the Trump administration, saying that there is, whether blessed or otherwise, a sense of xenophobia within this administration.
Yeah, I think look, the president has made clear since the day he was elected, and frankly going back through the campaign, that he is someone that seeks to unite this country. He has brought a diverse group of folks into his administration, both in terms of actual positions and people that he has sought the advice of. And I think he has been very forceful with his denunciation of people who seek to attack people because of their hate, because of their religion, because of their gender, because of the color of their skin. And it's something that he's going to continue to fight and make very, very clear that he has no place in this administration. But I think that it's ironic that no matter how many times he talks about this, that it's never good enough. Today, I think, was an unbelievably forceful comment by the president as far as his denunciation of the actions that are currently targeted towards Jewish community centers. But I think that he's been very clear previous to this that he wants to be someone that brings his country together and not divide people, especially in those areas. So I saw that statement. I wish that they had praised the president for his leadership in this area, and I think that hopefully as time continues to go by, they recognize his commitment to civil rights, to voting rights, to equality for all Americans. Yeah.
Sean, on that, the Southern
We're starting
poverty,
early with the two questions.
Sorry, Sean, Southern poverty. I think you'll want to respond to this.
Okay.
Southern Poverty Law Center said that the number of anti-Muslim groups in the U.S. has tripled between 2015 and 2016 during the time of the campaign. Is this message within the administration? Anti-Semitism is not allowed. Xenophobia is not allowed. Anti-Muslim sentiment within the administration. Has the president been forceful about that particular issue?
Well, I think that the president, in terms of his desire to combat radical Islamic terrorism, he understands that people who want to express a peaceful position have every right in our Constitution. But if you come here or want to express views that seek to do our country or our people harm, he's going to fight it aggressively, whether it's domestic acts that are going on here or attempts through people abroad to come into this country. So there's a big difference between preventing attacks and making sure that we keep this country safe so that there is no loss of life, and allowing people to express themselves in accordance with our First Amendment. Those are two very, very different things. Like, yeah.
Sean, you talked about how the manufacturing. I didn't know where you were going.
No, as long as we're in the back.
That's all right.
Next.
Talk next for me.
Okay, you can get next.
You said the manufacturing CEOs are coming on Thursday, so let me ask
Yeah.
you something that's important to them, which is the border adjustment tax. The
Right.
president earlier this year called it, quote, too complicated. Does he still feel that way? And whether he feels this is complicated or not, is there something within the administration one way or another about whether the president, the administration wants to see this in or out of the tax package?
So there's several pieces to that I'll try to unpack. That counts as like 8 questions, Blake.
Does he feel it's complicated?
No.
And what's your preference?
So first of all, on the meeting on Thursday, this is going to be a really historic opportunity for CEOs to come in and talk to members of the White House staff and others through various agencies about how we can create jobs, how regulations are stifling economic growth. And I think we'll have further details on that. But this is going to be a real interesting opportunity to really create a dialogue. What some of those policies are that are both helping them. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Sean. My name is Raquel from TV Globo News Brazil, and I have a question. There are doubts in Brazil right now about what's going to happen to the relationship between the two countries with the new administration, especially related to immigration and also to trade deals. Does President Trump also plan to review policies, bilateral policies with Brazil and trade deals? And also my second question, how does the administration see the current turmoil, economical and political turmoil in Brazil? And one more question, if I might. President Trump spoke with some foreign leaders from South America, like Argentina, Colombia, and Peru, but not was the vice president that spoke with President Temer from Brazil. Why is that?
Well, obviously we cherish our relationship with Brazil. I think there's a timing factor here, and I think we'll look forward to speaking with the president soon. So I wouldn't read too much into that right now. It's just a matter of getting things on the schedule. We're going to review all the trade deals that are out there. The president's made very clear. Some of them have occurred, well into a decade, 2 decades ago. I think the idea is to make sure that we are looking at all of the trade deals we have throughout the globe to make sure that they continue to benefit American workers. And in many cases, we can update these deals. So it's not any one particular country. I think that we're going to look throughout the whole host of trade agreements and then other trade-related agreements that we have with countries to make sure that they are the most up-to-date and they address the technological advances that have occurred, and look at the various services, whether it's financial services or manufacturing, and that they reflect the current state of play. So this isn't any one country. I think the president made clear throughout the campaign and subsequent that he wants to review every trade deal to make sure that America and American workers are maintaining the best deal they possible. Corbett. Oh, I'm sorry.
The turmoil.
Yeah.
How does the administration see the turmoil in Brazil now?
I'm going to ask you, I think that's a question for the Department of State right now. Corbett. Yeah. Zeke.
Thanks, Sean. Two questions for you. One on the NSC meeting later this afternoon. Is that the first meeting of the National Security Council of the President with all the principals there?
No, that is just a routine briefing, but because of the nature of it, it's happening in the Situation Room.
But is that with staff or is that with
staff?
Okay, so it's not with like the principals coming in.
Now we're at 3.
When do you anticipate the first formal meeting of the National Security Council?
I think General McMaster's got here at noon today, so we move fast. But I think that we need to give him a few days probably to get his team together. So the president was obviously very pleased with the selection. I think when you saw the bipartisan support that General McMaster received from the variety of the political spectrum, people who have served in Republicans and Democrats, academics, pundits, columnists, you know that he made an outstanding choice. We want to get him in, show him around the office a little bit, and then get him going. But when we have a date to announce the next meeting, we'll let you know.
On the joint address for next week, what's the president's goal for that address?
I think that I'll have a further update as the week goes on. We'll have briefings. The president's going to lay out, I think, 2 main things, where we've come and where we're going. I think that he is very pleased with the progress that he has made so far in the first month in office. And I think it's an opportunity to remind members of Congress and the American people what he promised them on the campaign trail, what he's done already in a very significant way to achieve and fulfill those promises that he made, but also talk about the challenges that we have as a nation and where we're going. And that's everything from our relationship with other countries in this world to some of the various domestic problems that we face, the challenges that we face in cities, healthcare, education. But the president wants to make sure that the American people have a very clear indication as to where he's taking this country and why he's going to enact the policies he's going to enact. Yeah. John. George, I'm sorry.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Let me ask you a question about the Vice President's European trip.
Yeah.
I'm curious whether he received any commitments from our European allies to commit more in terms of their financial contribution to NATO.
I think several of them. I saw Chancellor Merkel's comments previous to that, noting that they understand that the U.S. is asking for that commitment. Look, we're one of the only countries, there's a handful, that are doing what NATO requires, which is 2% of GDP. Some of them are at 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, and some of them are below that. But we've got to ask them to do what they agreed to do. And I think we've had a very positive reaction from most of these NATO countries that understand that the financial commitment that they agreed to is something that they need to live up to. And I think the Vice President continued to receive assurances, much like the President has through his foreign leader calls, where people not only understand it but are willing to follow through on it.
Is it an ongoing process?
Of course it's an ongoing. I mean, I think we need to follow up to make sure that the commitments that they're making on the phone or in person, in the case of the Vice President, are followed up. Dave.
Sean, thanks. The DHS memos today, obviously these immigration enforcement efforts cost money, hiring more agents.
Right.
Do you envision that the current budget is sufficient? Are you going to need to go to Congress?
Yeah, I think right now ICE and DHS in particular, as well as CBP, are looking at what this is going to cost and how much in putting a request together and then figuring out how much can be handled through reallocation of resources and how much we can save maybe in another area, but then also work with Congress.
Different matter.
Okay.
There was an election record report out today that the president raised more small campaign donations in 2016 than either Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders combined.
Right.
Did he have a reaction to that? Has he seen that?
I don't know, and I would ask you to probably go through the RNC for that. That's a political matter that we generally don't discuss. Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
The National Center for Transgender Equality, citing reliable sources, says the Trump administration today will rescind Obama-era guidance requiring schools to allow transgender kids to use the restroom consistent with their gender identity. Will the Trump administration rescind that guidance?
Right now, that's an issue that the Department of Justice and the Department of Education are addressing. I would tell you that, and I think that there'll be further guidance coming from DOJ in particular with respect to not just the executive order, but also the case that's in front of the Supreme Court. The President has maintained for a long time that this is a states' rights issue and not one for the federal government. So while there'll be further guidance coming out on this, I think that all you have to do is look at what the president's view has been for a long time, that this is not something that the federal government should be involved in. This is a states' rights issue. Matt?
Yeah.